right? So how do we actually integrate cardiovascular goals and resistance training goals, right? Well, the basics of it is it comes down to, first of all, understanding the adaptations that we're trying to elicit, right? And again, we've covered this more in depth in previous podcasts and our podcast series. So go back and listen to that if you want more in-depth stuff. But we can basically say that we have two. Now, this is a bit of a simplification, but we can basically say that there's two systems that we want to target with cardiovascular training. And that is the aerobic system and the anaerobic system, right? And these are just energy systems. An aerobic system, or the aerobic system, not an aerobic system. The aerobic system basically means that it is the system, the energy utilization system that is being used when oxygen is present, right? So it requires oxygen to work, right? And as a result of that, you kind of can't be at a pace that doesn't allow you to breathe, right? Very simplified way of thinking about it. Like if you're like gasping for air, you can pretty much guarantee that you're not getting oxygen into your body. Well, you are getting some, but you're not getting enough oxygen into your body to allow the aerobic system to work at full capacity, right? And the converse is true. We have the anaerobic system, which works, without oxygen. Now, that's not completely true because the aerobic system restocks the anaerobic system, the substrates used, and a few different things. So they are both, in tandem. They do work together. But the anaerobic system basically works without oxygen, right? So this is the stuff that gets your heart rate a lot higher, right? We can use heart rate as a bit of a guide because that also, like Gary said earlier on, it is technically the cardiorespiratory system, and we can kind of look at those two things in tandem. So if your heart rate is getting really, really elevated, that probably means that your breathing is also getting really, really elevated, and you're like you're taking shallower breaths generally, but you're taking quicker breaths, right? And that generally doesn't allow as much oxygen to get into the bloodstream. Like it technically does. It's a nice adaptation to allow you to get sufficient exchange going on, so that you can get rid of some of the carbon dioxide and get some more quote unquote good air into your lungs, right? So we have these two systems. Generally speaking, the aerobic system responds well to, we'll call it stuff in the below 140 beats per minute range, right? So heartbeats per minute, right? And then the anaerobic system responds well to higher intensity stuff, higher heart rates, right? But we can look at it from the heart rate perspective, and we can also look at it from the actual, we'll call it the energy, the bioenergetics, I suppose, and the time course of that. And what happens is, really, because we don't have enough oxygen, the anaerobic system is really only good for about 2 minutes, right? After 2 minutes, and obviously as you get closer to the 2 minutes, that kind of starts getting, we'll call it worse. It's not as effective. It's not as an effective energy source. And this is why you can't sprint for 5 minutes. You can't just like, oh, I'm going to run as fast as I possibly can for 5 minutes, right? You kind of get to the end of your anaerobic ability, and that might be 90 seconds, it might be 2 minutes, where you start really noticing this drop off, right? So within that 0 to 2 minutes, you're kind of using the anaerobic system. However, the aerobic system is still being used at that time. And after that kind of, we'll say 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds, you start getting more and more aerobic utilization. And again, this is why your performance in terms of a sprint kind of dips down after that, Like this is why you can sprint. You can sprint for like 10 seconds and you're fucking golden. Like there's, that's handy. That's because that's actually the alactic system, or the creatine phosphate, or no, what's the thing? What's the name of it?
ATP phosphocreatine, or creatine phosphate.
Yeah, sorry, I knew I was creatine phosphate. The ATP PCR system, right? So, you're actually not really even tapping into the anaerobic system then. Like you are obviously tapping into it a little bit, but you're basically just using, we'll call it free floating energy for that system. It doesn't have to actually do any metabolism to break down glucose to, start fueling these other systems, right? So that's something to be aware of, that we basically have a time course, and then we also have heart rate zones that we can use, right? And that actually allows us to program this stuff, right? So would you say that's enough information just to kind of start this all off in terms of understanding the different adaptations? Well, it's not all the adaptations, to cardiovascular training if we understand, okay, we've got this aerobic system and we've got this anaerobic system, and we can use heart rate and we can use time course to start programming that stuff, right?